Now we are going to start working on our right front piece. This is where I find the drops pattern for a beginner a little on the frustrating side. So on my errata sheet, which is also a tip sheet, I am trying to explain it in a little bit more clear manner. It's a little bit challenging, but it's not impossible, because there's three things that have to happen on the right front piece. You have to continue knitting, obviously. You also have to remember to put in your last buttonhole. While you're knitting, and in addition to remembering your last buttonhole, you have to start decreasing the stitches along this edge in order to increase for a bigger armhole. That's not enough. And after the last buttonhole, while you're still knitting, you also have to, and sometimes simultaneously with the armhole decreases, you also have to start doing the neckline decreases. So it's just a matter of keeping track of what you are doing. The way I keep track, I do have a row counter for one part, and I'm going to use this to help me remember where I am on the armhole decrease. And then I'll just, if I had another stitch counter, which I often do, or a row counter, I'd use that for the neckline decrease. Or you can just use something like stitch markers that you just put down to help you keep track of how many where you're at. It doesn't matter how you do it. Don't try and watch TV and do this, or you will get very confused. Okay, so you've transferred your left piece and your back onto to some kind of a stitch holder, and now it's time to work on the right front piece. So I want you to start from the wrong side, and the reason I want you to start from the wrong side, whoops, sorry about that, is that when I am tying in threads at the end, it's not impossible to tie in or to bind off a thread that's along the edge of a sweater, but I try not to have the beginning of my starting a new yarn at the edge of a nice garment, like that's the nice edge piece, and I tend not to want to do that. I would rather tie in my loose ends along like an armhole where you don't see it as readily as you would on a button band. So you take your yarn and you just pretend you're starting over in some ways. So we're going to start from the wrong side, the purl side, and if you look at my errata / tip sheet on the armhole decrease, just read the instructions that are there, but on the armhole decrease it says start on the wrong side, so that's what we're doing. Row 1, bind off 2 stitches, purl across. Okay, how do you bind off 2 stitches, especially when we haven't even got a thread started? It's okay, you can. So the first thing I want you to do is slip 1 stitch, because that is how you would bind off. You start by slipping 1 stitch. Then you're going to take your yarn and you would purl 1 stitch, and it's the beginning of a yarn. Leave yourself a bit of length to weave in at the end when we're done the garment. So we're going to purl that 1 stitch. It's a little loose because it's not tied into anything, and then we have to bind 1 off. So we take the slipped one and we pass it over, and we have bound off 1 stitch. We need to bind off 2. So now I purl the next one. Whoop, need a bit more tension on there. It's a little bit difficult at the beginning because things are loose. Okay, I'm just going to tug that down a little bit, and then I have to bind it off or cast it off. So you take the other stitch that's on the needle and bring it over. So just tug on that a bit because it's loose, it's not tied down, so you just want to firm it up. Okay, so you have bound off 2, and now you just purl across and do your 5 seed stitches. That is easy enough. And when you have finished that, I like to keep track, get your row marker, and indicate that you have finished row 1. I have finished row 1 of the armhole decrease. I've indicated that on my stitch marker, and now I would like to start row 2. So this is where you have to keep track of your measurements. Is it time for my last buttonhole? Well, I'm doing the size, the second size, the 6 to 9, and I do my last buttonhole at 18 centimeters. And honestly, at the beginning of every row, I want you to stop and do your measurement, because you will get mixed up and forget to put in your buttonhole. And so I know that I'm supposed to do my buttonhole at the 18 centimeter mark, and I'm not quite there yet. So I know probably on my next even row is when I would do my buttonhole. So this one I would be free, and there's no neckline decrease yet because I have to finish my last buttonhole before the neckline decrease starts. So on my particular row 2, it'll just be the straight pattern on cross. Maybe on yours, you're going to be doing your buttonhole and then straight across. Okay, so go ahead and do your row 2.